The room is underground, beneath the Imperial Palace in Tokyo. It is just before midnight on August 9th, 1945. At the far end of a high-ceilinged conference room, a 44-year-old man in an ill-fitting field marshal's uniform sits on a raised platform before a folding screen. Around long tables to his left and right sit his generals and admirals, men who have spent the past 20 hours arguing and have reached nothing. The air is dense with cigarette smoke and the particular exhaustion of men who know the room has run out of exits and will not say so. At 2 a.m. on August 10th, 1945, Emperor Hirohito of Japan did something no emperor had done in living memory. He spoke. 6 hours later, across the city, on the floor of his official residence, a man is dying. His name is Korachika Anami. He was, until this morning, Japan's war minister, the most ferocious voice in that room for continuing the war. His wounds are self-inflicted. They are not immediately fatal. Beside his body, under his hand, a folded note. The words are brief. They read, "I, with my death, humbly apologize to the Emperor for the great crime." This is what the previous 72 hours had cost him. August 6th. The morning a single bomb rewrote the calendar, and the men who spent 3 days refusing to read what it said. What happened in Tokyo between August 6th and August 9th begins with a trap the Japanese leadership had built for itself, and was already living inside, long before the first bomb fell. By the summer of 1945, Japan exists inside a tightening vice. The naval blockade has strangled the home islands. The fishing fleet, once the backbone of the civilian food supply, it brings in barely a fifth of its pre-war catch. The 1945 rice harvest is the worst since 1909. Hunger is no longer a threat. It is a fact. Across the country, the civilian economy is not declining. It has collapsed. The military picture is worse. On Iwo Jima, nearly 99% of 21,000 defenders died. On Okinawa, 94% of the 117,000 troops were killed. These are not casualty rates. They are near total annihilation, by design and doctrine, against an enemy with unlimited industrial capacity and no visible intention of stopping. The Japanese military has a plan for what comes next. It is called Ketsugo. The Americans are coming, everyone in Tokyo knows this. And Japan cannot stop them. What Japan can do is make the landing so catastrophically expensive in American lives that Washington flinches, accepts a negotiated end, and leaves Japan something other than unconditional defeat. This is the doctrine, and it requires one particular belief, that American will is more fragile than Japanese blood. The Japanese leadership also holds a diplomatic lifeline in reserve. For months, Tokyo has been reaching quietly toward the Soviet Union, their nominal neutral, asking Moscow to mediate peace on more favorable terms. This is the backstop, the exit ramp that makes continued military resistance feel rational. If Ketsugo buys time and Soviet mediation buys terms, Japan survives with its institutions intact. There is one problem with this strategy. It is already dead. Stalin promised the Allies at Tehran in 1943 that he would eventually enter the Pacific War. At Yalta in February 1945, he promised to do so within 90 days of Germany's defeat. Now the Soviets have been preparing a massive invasion of Japanese-held Manchuria for months, while maintaining just enough diplomatic warmth to keep Tokyo hoping. American code breakers are reading Japan's diplomatic traffic in real time. Washington knows exactly what Tokyo is asking the Soviets for, and Washington knows the Soviets are stringing them along. The Japanese leadership is standing on a trapdoor, certain it is solid ground. Japan's wartime decision-making flows through a body called the Supreme Council for the Direction of the War. 6 men: the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, the War Minister. the Navy Minister, and the two Chiefs of Staff, Army and Navy. No major decision without their unanimous consent. No cabinet without the Army's representative. A single resignation can bring a government down, and which means the Army holds a permanent structural veto over any peace it doesn't want. On one side of this room in August 1945, three men are moving at different speeds with different levels of willingness toward ending the war. On the other side, three men who believe defeat is preferable to dishonor. Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki is 77 years old, a retired admiral, white-haired, who keeps his real opinions so close to his chest that even those who work beside him aren't entirely sure what they are. He survived an assassination attempt by nationalist officers in 1936. He was chosen, in part, because people believed he could control the army. That belief will be tested. Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo is the room's most persistent civilian intelligence, 62 years old, compact and formal, and a career diplomat who spent years posted to Moscow and Berlin and came back understanding that Japan is on the wrong side of arithmetic. In the cabinet rooms of wartime Japan, his directness is not a common or safe quality. Navy Minister Mitsumasa Yonai, the quiet one. He was Prime Minister once, in 1940, and the Army forced him out for opposing the alliance with Germany and the path to war. The man the military threw out 5 years ago for being right is back at the table. On the other side, Army Chief of Staff Yoshijiro Umezu, lean and angular, a career staff officer with a thin mustache and a categorical refusal to consider what he cannot accept. Naval Chief of Staff Suemu Toyoda, brought in specifically because his predecessor thought the war was lost. Toyoda does not. And then there is Anami, Korochika. Anami is 58 years old, eye broad-shouldered, physically imposing. A man his subordinates describe as the very model of a modern samurai. He practices kendo and archery. He exerts a kind of personal gravity on everyone in the room. He failed the entrance exam to the military academy twice before passing on his third attempt, and graduated in the same class as two of the emperor's uncles. He was Hirohito's aide-de-camp. He is, by every account, ferociously devoted to his sovereign. And in late 1944, he privately told a staff officer at the War Ministry that Japan could not be defended from invasion. Hold that. Remember it. Above these 6 men sits a figure who is constitutionally forbidden from intervening in what they do. Emperor Hirohito, 44 years old, slender, in wire-rimmed glasses, and photographed throughout the war astride his white horse in a uniform that tailors are not permitted to fit properly because they are not permitted to touch a man revered as a god. The emperor is not allowed to direct policy. He's not allowed to speak during formal deliberations. All 6 men around that table claim to act in his name, and he must sit above them and watch. It is 8:15 in the morning on August 6, 1945. 2 silver B-29 superfortresses fly high over Hiroshima, a city of 343,000 people, a warm summer morning, a population going about its business. A third aircraft circles some distance away. The lead plane is called the Enola Gay. The weapon in its belly is code-named Little Boy. The blast wave tears outward in a concentric ring for 2 miles, demolishing everything it touches, and people are picked up and thrown against whatever is still standing. Some are not thrown. Carbon statues arranged where they stood. The city goes black, then gray, then emerges into something unrecognizable. Figures move through the ruins with their burned skin hanging from them. In the first instant, 70,000 people are dead. By the end of the year, more than 100,000. In Tokyo, the first reports are fragmentary. A city has been destroyed, but the mechanism is unclear. The army orders an independent investigation. What the army does not do, what no one in the Big Six does, is convene a meeting. The next day, physicist Yoshio Nishina travels to Hiroshima. He examines the damage and returns to Tokyo. His finding is unambiguous. This was a nuclear weapon. The Americans have built an atomic bomb. Across the Pacific, that same August 7th, American commanders, Purnell, Parsons, Tibbets, Spatz, and LeMay, are meeting on Guam. They have intercepted Japanese cabinet communications. There is no sign of surrender. They decide to proceed with the second bomb. In Tokyo, War Minister Anami dismisses the report as American propaganda and proposes waiting for the official investigation to conclude before any policy response. Togo pushes for an immediate convening of the Big Six. He is blocked. Military members force postponement of the meeting. To the morning of August 9th, two command structures are operating in parallel, one uncertain the weapon even exists, the other already scheduling the sequel. Only one of them is moving, and in the gap between them, Anami's verdict stands as the ruling logic of the Japanese government. I'm convinced the Americans had only one bomb, none after all. Marquis Koichi Kido serves the Emperor as Lord Keeper of the Privy Seal, chief advisor, back-channel operator, the man whose diary will become one of this period's primary historical records. On August 7th, that diary records what Hirohito says upon hearing the damage reports from Hiroshima. I don't care what happens to me personally. We should lose no time in ending the war so as not to have another such tragedy. The Emperor is speaking in private to one confidant in a room with no minutes. His words go nowhere. The constitutional silence that has kept Hirohito above politics is doing its work. He can grieve, he cannot act. Admiral Toyoda, processing the scientist's nuclear confirmation, arrives at his own calculation. Even if America has made one bomb, they cannot have made many. So the difficulty of securing radioactive materials, the weight of world opinion. Toyoda is confident the arsenal is limited. The war, he argues, can continue. Toyoda is not a fool. He is reasoning carefully from the information available to him, reaching the wrong answer with the confidence of a man who has no idea what he does not know. In a few hours, his argument will be tested. The meeting still has not happened. August 8th afternoon. Emperor Hirohito meets privately with Foreign Minister Togo. No generals present, no formal minutes, just the Emperor and the diplomat. Togo will report afterward that Hirohito spoke plainly. Now that this sort of weapon has been used, it is becoming increasingly impossible to continue the war. So I do not think it is a good idea to miss an opportunity to end the war by attempting to secure advantageous conditions. The most powerful man in Japan has made his decision. He has made it more than 16 hours before the Supreme Council formally meets, and he has no constitutional mechanism to enforce it. That night, the second earthquake arrives. Late on August 8th, in fulfillment of a promise Stalin made at Yalta 7 months earlier, a promise Tokyo knew nothing about, a promise American intelligence had known about for months. The Soviet Union declares war on Japan. By midnight, Soviet forces are crossing into Manchuria. The neutrality pact Japan had been counting on as its diplomatic foundation is gone. So the back channel to Moscow, the lifeline that made continued military resistance feel rational, never existed in the form Japan imagined it. Japan has just lost its last diplomatic option. It has one bomb's worth of evidence of what American industrial capacity can deliver. And the meeting still hasn't happened. At approximately 11 a.m. on August 9th, 1945, the Supreme Council for the Direction of the War finally convenes. At 11:02 a.m. on August 9th, 1945, a B-29 named Boxcar releases Fat Man over Nagasaki. The meeting Japan's military had delayed for 3 days was happening at the exact moment a second city was destroyed. The session opens while Nagasaki is still burning. Between 40,000 and 75,000 people die immediately. Fat Man carries the explosive force of 21,000 tons of TNT, more powerful than Little Boy. And the bomb's intended target was Kokura, but 3 passes found it obscured by cloud. Nagasaki was the secondary option, a weather front and a navigation decision, and 70,000 people. Inside the conference room, the 6 men argue their positions. Togo, Suzuki, and Yonai are prepared to accept the Potsdam Declaration with one condition, that Japan's imperial institution be preserved. Anami, Umezu, and Toyoda will not have it. They insist on 3 additional terms. Japan handles its own disarmament. Japan prosecutes its own war crimes. No Allied occupation of the home islands. All 3 or nothing. General Umezu crystallizes the war faction's position in a single sentence. The word capitulation cannot be found in this country's military dictionary. He says this while Nagasaki burns. Anami goes further. But if the Americans reject Japan's conditions, if it comes to an invasion, the nation must fight on. He puts a vision to it. Would it not be wondrous for this whole nation to be destroyed like a beautiful flower? This from a man who privately told a colleague in 1944 that Japan could not be defended from invasion. Then the news from Nagasaki arrives. The war faction's foundational claim that America has exhausted its atomic arsenal, that Hiroshima was a singular weapon, that the war can still be decided by Japanese blood on Japanese soil, has been disproven in real time, in the room, while they are making it. The deadlock holds. The Big Six split 3-3. The full cabinet convenes at 2:30 that afternoon and argues until 5:30. No decision. It has now been more than 3 days since Hiroshima. A second city is destroyed. The Soviet Union is in the war. The diplomatic strategy is ash. And there is still no decision. What Prime Minister Suzuki does next has no precedent. Late that night, he asks Emperor Hirohito for an imperial command. In the constitutional structure of Japan, this has never happened. The emperor's personal opinion, voiced in a formal conference, becomes a state decision, the Saidan. What Suzuki is asking for is a rupture in the political architecture of Japan. He's asking the man the system was built to protect, to break the system. The imperial conference convenes just before midnight. Hirohito sits on his raised platform before the folding screen in his brown army uniform. To his left and right, behind long tables, the generals and the admirals and the ministers. The room is high-ceilinged and very still, and each minister presents his position. Umezu argues that the Soviet entry, while unfavorable, does not invalidate Ketsugo, and this is not entirely wrong, as Soviet sea lift capacity cannot threaten the home islands. The peace faction speaks of the deterioration of the domestic situation, their careful phrase for what they cannot quite name. Hunger, exhaustion, and the specter of something darker rising beneath both. Anami argues his conditions to the last. Even here, at midnight, with the war decided in every room except this one, he will not release his grip. It is 2 a.m. on August 10th. Hirohito removes a glove. He wipes his brow. He speaks. In the archaic, formal language of the Japanese throne, the language that creates distance and gravity simultaneously. And I have given serious thought to the situation prevailing at home and abroad, and have concluded that continuing the war can only mean destruction for the nation and prolongation of bloodshed and cruelty in the world. In the room, silence. The cabinet convenes immediately afterward. Suzuki puts the sedan before them. It is unanimously endorsed. A constitutional system that has paralyzed Japan for 3 days has been broken by the man it was built to protect. The war has not yet ended, but the decision has been made. Before signing, Anami extracts one final condition, a promise that if the Allies reject the Japanese terms, the war continues. even in this moment, he will not be the man who surrenders. What follows is 5 more days. Japan transmits its conditional acceptance via Switzerland on August 10th. The Allies' reply, not drafted by Secretary of State James Burns, makes clear that the Emperor's post-war authority will be subject to the Supreme Commander of Allied powers. The war faction reads this as a threat to the imperial institution itself and reignites 2 more imperial conferences, 2 more demands that the Emperor speak. He does. At the final conference on August 14th, Hirohito tells the assembled cabinet, "I have listened carefully to each of the arguments presented in opposition to the view that Japan should accept the Allied reply as it stands and without further clarification or modification, but my own thoughts have not undergone any change." On the morning newspapers of August 11th, Anami's name appears above a statement to the army. "The only thing for us to do is fight doggedly to the end, though it may mean chewing grass, eating dirt, and sleeping in the field." He prints this while the process of ending the war is already underway. Then, the coup. On the night of August 14th, Major Kenji Hatanaka and a small group of officers move on the Imperial Palace. The 2nd Regiment of the Imperial Guards enters the grounds. Hatanaka tells the regimental commander, falsely, that Anami, Umezu, and the Eastern District Army are all participants. He needs Anami's name to make the coup credible. It is the only weight that could move the army. Anami does not give it. His refusal, his insistence in these final hours on obedience to the Emperor's decision, is the moment when the 2 registers of his life briefly align. The coup fails. Scholars have been arguing about what caused all of this since 1945 and have not stopped. Admiral Toyoda himself, is in post-war interrogation by American GHQ, offered the most honest available summary. "I believe the atomic bombing was a cause for the surrender, but it was not the only cause." Some historians argue the record of the imperial conferences makes clear Hirohito ended the war because of the bomb. Others argue the Soviet entry removed Japan's last negotiating option and was the more decisive shock. The evidence supports both claims and settles neither. There is one more fact that belongs in this accounting. J. Robert Oppenheimer cabled General Groves with a shipping schedule for additional atomic weapons, the first available by August 11th, another by August 12th, another by August 14th. The assembly line was running. Had the Imperial Conference failed? Had the deadlock held 1 more day? So had Anami's resistance found 2 more hours of traction? There was a 3rd bomb, then a 4th. The 72 hours mattered in part because they were, almost to the day, the last window in which the story could have ended differently. August 14th. Anami signs the surrender document with the rest of the cabinet. He attends the final meeting. He tells his brother-in-law, "As a Japanese soldier, I must obey my emperor." Then he goes home. The morning of August 15th, Hirohito's recorded voice plays on the radio for the first time in Japanese history. The voice of the crane, audible now to everyone across the whole nation. His people hear him say that the time has come to bear the unbearable. Anami is on the floor of his official residence. His wounds are not immediately fatal. He lies there for 3 hours, and a staff officer eventually orders a physician to end it. Under his body, the note. "Believing firmly that our sacred land shall never perish, I, with my death, humbly apologize to the Emperor for the great crime." 4 words of apology, a lifetime in the code that made them necessary, and the question he did not answer, and perhaps could not. Which crime? Losing. That was 10 million decisions made by 10,000 men over 14 years. Surrendering. He signed the document. Before he signed it, he had told his emperor he would obey. Or this, the 3-day gap. The meeting postponed to the morning of August 9th, while the decision to drop the 2nd bomb was made on August 7th. The confident verdict, 1 bomb after all, delivered while the next weapon was being armed. Hiroshima on the 6th, Nagasaki on the 9th. And in the space between the beautiful flower speech, the unmoved deadlock, a man who knew as early as 1944 that the home islands could not be defended. His sword and a blood-stained dress uniform are in the Yushukan Museum in Tokyo, where they remain. The note survives. The question it raises has no answer.